The candle nearest his shoulder did not move when he breathed. I noticed that before I noticed the silver wound under his collarbone, before I noticed the ring of candles he had lit for me, before I noticed the manuscript laid open on the table at the seventh method, the one not in the academy texts, the one that required the cooperation of the creature, someone he had let close, someone he had shaped. He stood very straight and very still, the way he stood for everything that mattered to him. His shirt was already unbuttoned. His gloves were already off. He had set the blade out where my hand would find it without searching.
"I have prepared everything,"
he said. I knew he had. He had prepared 3 years of me. He had prepared the grip on the hilt, the angle of the wrist, the chain at my throat. He had prepared the cut on my palm to sit in the same place as the wound on his chest. What he had not prepared for was the small thing he had said to me in the chapel, quiet, plain, like setting down something he should never have been allowed to hold. I stepped into the candle ring. He reached for my wrist as if to steady it, and found it already still. Chapter 1. The blade that would not warm. The candle beside us did not move when he spoke. I noticed that before I noticed his hand closing over mine on the silver. He stood at my back, half a step closer than the lesson required, and corrected my grip the way he had corrected it 100 times, thumb under the guard, wrist angled in, the blade tipped just enough that the room slid across its surface in a thin band of light. Cold bled through my glove the way water bleeds through paper, not the cold of a stone room in winter, a deeper, more patient cold, the kind that doesn't pass.
"Lower,"
Professor Mulak said. His voice came from behind my ear, exactly where it always came from.
"You are giving him your forearm.
I'm giving him the blade.
He will not take what you offer.
A pause that felt measured.
He will take what you forget."
I angled the silver another degree and caught the room in it, the rack of weapons, the iron sconces, the slanted line of my own jaw. Where his face should have been, there was only a smear, like a thumbprint pressed into oil. I had been waiting to see that smear for 11 weeks. Tonight it sat there in my blade, as if it had always been waiting for me to bother looking. I counted because counting is what I do when something in me wants to do anything else. 2 of his breaths in the span of 12 of mine. The same ratio I had recorded every Tuesday since the first week of autumn. 41 anomalies in the field journal at my hip, cold hands through gloves, a reflection that wouldn't hold, candle flames that did not move when he passed them. The candle beside us was still not moving. I watched its edge while he spoke against my hair, and the flame stayed perfectly upright.
"Fear,"
He said.
"is useful only if you can make it kneel."
I've never had trouble with kneeling.
For the first time in 11 weeks, his hand stilled on mine. It was the smallest thing, a pause between corrections, no longer than a heartbeat. Except his heartbeat was a thing he did not have. The stillness happened against the back of my hand, and I felt it like a door clicking shut, somewhere far inside a house. He recovered. He always recovered. His thumb resettled at the joint of my wrist and pressed once, gently against my pulse. I willed the pulse to behave. It behaved. He registered that too. I felt him register it.
"Good,"
he said and stepped away. The bout that followed was a formality. He drew his own blade and walked me through the 7th sequence, then the 11th, and his praise arrived in the same measured doses he had been issuing for years. I performed for him the way I always performed for him. Clean, exact, slightly faster than he expected. When the lesson ended, he sheathed his blade, inclined his head, and was at the door before I had finished wiping mine. The crimson silk of his lining caught at the doorframe and slid free with a small dry sound, the only honest noise he made all night.
"Tuesday."
He said.
"Same chamber."
Tuesday.
He closed the door without sound. The candle finally moved when he was gone, a small, ordinary flicker. The room felt warmer the second it did. I stood with the silver in my hand and looked at the smear of nothing where his face had been, and listened to my own pulse for a long time. In my quarters, I added 3 lines to the journal. Cold hand, faint reflection, candle would not move. I flipped backward through the pages and counted slowly in pencil. 41. 42 if I was honest about tonight, and I was beginning to be honest about tonight. I unwrapped the silver chain from its velvet at the back of my drawer, my grandmother's. Blessed, supposedly, though I had never seen the priest who did the work, and had stopped believing in the kind of woman she might have been at his age. I had kissed it before bed every night since I was 9 years old, the way other girls kiss prayers. I brushed it across the inside of my wrist now and felt nothing. Not heat, not the faintest prickle, nothing at all. It had never meant anything against my own skin. 15 years in my keeping, and not once had it meant anything. Tomorrow, I thought, it would mean something. I wound it twice around my throat and lay down in the dark and did not sleep. Chapter 2. The Archive That Remembered Her Name. I forged the pass on the senior instructor's stationery. The seal was easy. He kept his stamp in a left drawer that did not lock, and his ink dried in the same shade I'd been writing in since my first year. I dated the request 2 days back and walked into the restricted archive at the hour after lunch when Bernard Quilby was always halfway through whatever pastry he wasn't supposed to be eating at his desk. He did not look up. He did not ask which shelf. That was the first thing. He stamped my pass without reading the name on it, and his ink-stained fingers waved me through with the bored generosity of a man who had been told, at some point, not to bother with this particular face. He hummed a tune that did not quite resolve. I walked past him into the long aisles. Dust hung in the lamp shafts and turned in slow shapes that I refused, this time, to find pretty. My hands had decided to shake. I made them stop. I went to the dead student shelves first. The word I used was context. I was looking for the 7 names lodged in my chest since the second year, when I had counted in passing the silhouettes of girls in Professor Mulock's group portraits. 7 was a number I had noticed and then forgotten on purpose. The files were leather, soft with handling, indexed in a hand I now recognized. 7 exceptional female students, a century between the first and the last, each closed with a death certificate signed off by the same precise signature, the long-tailed M, like a question mark laid sideways. 1 drowned, 1 fell. 1 was killed in the field. 1 died in her sleep at 28. I stopped reading the causes at 4. The pattern was what mattered. 7 and 7 and the signature. The 8th file was filed under my own surname. I almost did not open it. I stood with my hand on the cover and counted 4 of my own breaths before my fingers worked. Inside, my parents' names in his handwriting. My village. A description of the road from the well to our gate so accurate I could almost smell the dust. The phrase, "She will be ready," circled twice in red ink, as if even he had needed to confirm it. The file was dated 3 years before I walked through the academy gates. The final pages, the ones that would tell me what had happened to my village, had been torn out. The torn edge was clean. He had cut, not ripped. He did everything cleanly. I closed the file. I tucked it under my coat. On the way past Bernard, I asked after his daughter, who was 11 and afraid of horses. He told me. He never finished the sentence about the horses. I walked out of the archive at a perfectly ordinary pace, and the moment my door closed behind me, I knelt over the wash basin and emptied my stomach into it without making a single sound. I rinsed my mouth. I tied my hair back. I forged a second pass before midnight and went back down into the archive with a single candle and the kind of stillness in my chest that I had thought I had learned from him, but might have learned earlier than that. The torn pages were not in the files drawer. I knew they wouldn't be. They would be in the sealed wing beneath the chapel, behind a lock he had taught me to pick in my second year, claiming the technique was traditional. He had been very thorough about it. He had made me practice for 3 weeks, until my hands no longer trembled at the 3rd pin. That night, my tools stayed in my pocket. I stood in front of the iron door and pressed my forehead against it and let the cold sit against my skin until I could pretend it was a different cold. I knew what was on the other side. I was not yet a person who could carry it. 42, I thought. I went back up. Chapter 3. The Lesson. He should not have taught. His office had no warmth to it, even with the fire lit. The bookshelves climbed all the way to a ceiling I had never been able to see clearly, and his desk was so polished I could read the room in the wood. He was already standing when I arrived, gloves on, both of them, and the manuscript already open on the desk between us.
Come closer,
He said. The manuscript was older than anything I had been given before. The paper had gone soft at the corners. The ink was the brown of dried tea. The handwriting was his, younger perhaps, or just less careful, the letters leaning forward as if they had somewhere to be. He walked me through the first 6 methods, the way a man might walk a daughter through a recipe. Decapitation with a particular kind of cut, fire that began at the heart, salt at the threshold of the resting place, a blade through the eye into the back of the skull, which was harder than the books admitted because the bone was thicker there, drowning in consecrated water, which sounded easier than it was, a long ritual involving the throat that took most of a night. At the 7th, he slowed.
The 7th
He said,
is not in the Academy texts
Why?
because it requires the cooperation of the creature.
I did not look up. I kept my eyes on the page and tried to make my hand write the way it wrote when nothing was happening.
Cooperation.
Someone the vampire has let close. Someone he has shaped.
He removed one glove and set it on the desk between us, neat as a body laid out. He never removed both.
Someone whose blade he will not raise a hand against.
Why would you give me this?
Because you are the only student I believe will not hesitate.
His hand came to rest on the page beside mine. The cold of him reached me through my sleeve. I felt the moment he wanted to say more, and the moment he closed his mouth against the wanting. Then, and this had never happened, in 11 weeks of counting, in 3 years of his teaching, in any private lesson I could remember, his hand stilled and a sentence escaped him that he had not planned.
You remind me,
He stopped, he looked at me, and for a fraction of a second his eyes had something in them I did not have a word for, and then they didn't. My thumb went to the signet on my right hand and turned it once. My grip on the pen changed without my permission. The nib bit a small black dot into the margin that I did not lift to blot.
That will do for tonight.
He said. He left the room before I could lift the manuscript. I tucked it inside my coat with hands that I was not pretending were steady. In the corridor, I found a margin note I had missed on the 7th page, in the same handwriting. For the one who will not hesitate. My own breath sounded very loud in my ears. I almost walked into Tamsin Marcos before I saw her. She was leaning against the wall outside the washroom, with her shoulder against the stone, and her hands jammed into the pockets of her coat. The split scar on her lip caught the lamplight. She looked, as she always looked, like she had slept somewhere she shouldn't have and was unembarrassed about it.
Raymond. Marcos? You're carrying. I'm tired.
She huffed once, not quite a laugh.
Walk with me.
We walked. She saved her voice until we were 3 corridors away from anyone, and even then spoke in the half-sentences she favored, as if she expected to be interrupted and was getting ahead of it.
His favorites.
She said.
They always fall. Whose favorites? You know whose.
I kept walking. I kept my face arranged the way I had been arranging it for years.
I don't know what you're talking about.
She stopped. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, at my wrist first, then my throat, then my mouth, and I watched her accept the lie. She didn't push. She nodded once, very slowly, as if she were filing something away.
All right.
She said.
All right, Raymond.
She walked off in the other direction. I went back to my quarters and slid the manuscript under the loose floorboard beside my bed and did not think about her face for the next hour. I almost succeeded. There was a flower under my door when I went to lock it. A single dried bloom, pale and rust-edged, the species I had not seen since I was 6 years old. They grew only on the southern frontier, in the dry beds outside my village. I had braided them into my mother's hair the summer before the summer she died. I picked it up. I put it on my desk. I stared at it until the candle burned down. Chapter 4. The Night the Silver Burned. I wore the chain openly the next time. The courtyard behind the dueling chambers was bright with the kind of moon that does not warm anything. Frost laced the stone. He arrived 3 minutes after I did, in the long crimson-lined coat that always caught at the edges when he moved, and his white gloves were on his hands, and his cane was tucked under his arm, and he looked, as he always looked, like a man who had been carved into the air rather than walked into it. He noticed the chain. He did not let me see him notice. We sparred. I had spent the afternoon arranging the bout in my head. The angles I would need, the half-second in which a brushed wrist could be made to look like an error. It went the way I had planned. On the third exchange, I let the blade slip a hand's width wide and dragged the chain across the back of his wrist as I withdrew. The smell came first, sharp and faint, like burnt sugar. Then the small, wet whisper of skin. A black blister rose where the silver had touched, and then sealed itself between one of his breaths and the next. He did not look at the wound. He looked at me. His grip on the hilt flexed once, held 1 second too long. His eyes found the chain at my throat and stayed there past anything that could be called pedagogy. When he spoke again, his voice had lost a single degree of formality, and the stillness around him went brittle, the way ice goes brittle before it breaks rather than after. I waited for him to lunge, to run, to do any of the things the textbooks told me a cornered creature did. He did none of them. He shifted his weight, lifted his blade, and continued the bout from the fourth movement of the sequence, as if I had merely confirmed an answer he had already written on the board. The bout ended in something short of victory, but he had let me come closer than usual. He sheathed his blade and stood breathing, the performance of breathing 2 and 12, and looked for 1 second, somewhere over my left shoulder before he spoke.
Stop pretending you are still deciding.
I worked the silver chain back under my collar before I trusted my voice.
Why haven't you killed me?
That was never the design.
What was?
He did not turn his head.
Tuesday.
He walked out of the courtyard and left me with my pulse not racing, and the chain warm against my throat from his proximity, and a kind of relief in my chest I would have given a great deal not to feel. I did not report him. I needed more, I decided. There were procedures. Reporting required documentation, and documentation required a signature I had been forging without thinking too hard about it. Serious people waited for complete data. I went to my quarters and wrapped the chain twice around my throat and slept in it for the first time in my life. For 3 days he assigned me nothing. It was worse than punishment. It was worse than him knowing. He had set me down and stepped back and watched, and the watching sat at the back of my neck wherever I went. I caught myself twice each night walking past his office door, pretending to be on my way somewhere, pretending I did not slow as I passed. On the third night, I leaned my palm flat against his door and stood there for a count of 12 and did not knock. On the fourth night, I stopped pretending. I knocked. Chapter 5. The wound he refused to heal. He opened the door without surprise. His private chambers refused the expectations I had carried to the door. Ornament, perhaps, or the kind of indulgence ancient men were supposed to allow themselves. They were sparse: a single armchair, a writing desk, a narrow bed I did not look at, a fire that gave no heat, and on the far wall, where a man might have hung a mirror or a crest, a single portrait. She had my mouth, she had my cheekbones, and my hands folded the way I folded my hands, and a soft, hazel warmth in her eyes I did not have and would never have. Her hair was chestnut. Her clothing was 2 centuries old. The locket at her throat caught the candlelight, the way my chain caught the candlelight at the bout, and for a moment my stomach turned over on nothing. To the left of the portrait, the wall held 7 faint outlines, frames that had been removed and not painted over. He had touched those places, I knew, the way other men touched relics. The dried flower I had carried in from my desk that morning sat in my coat pocket like a small accusation against my hip. He did not invite me to sit. He had already moved to the desk and was unbuttoning his shirt with the patience of a man undressing for a physician.
Don't.
I said.
I am not seducing you.
He stopped. His hand stayed at the second button. He looked at the floor between us, as if it had asked him a question he was not ready to answer, and then he said it.
Louise.
He had said my name 1,000 times, in classrooms, in corrections, in the polite acknowledgments of corridors. He had never said it like that, quiet, plain, as if he were setting something down that he should not have been holding in the first place. I felt it land in my chest before I felt my face arrange itself against feeling it. He opened his shirt at the collar. The silver wound sat in the hollow under his clavicle, raw and wet at the edges, an open thing the size of a thumbprint. It had not healed. It would not, I understood, ever heal. It had been kept.
400 years.
He said.
I open it every morning.
With what?
A piece of the blade that made it.
I looked at the wall again, the 7 empty places. He noticed me looking, and did the thing some part of me had expected before I could name it. He touched them, one at a time, in order, with the back of 2 fingers. He did not name them. He did not need to. They were a sentence I had been reading the bones of for weeks.
7 came before me.
I said.
7.
Each failed.
Some I could not bear to push. One was clever, and not cruel enough.
He let his hand fall.
You are different because you calculate.
It landed somewhere between a compliment and a verdict. My thumb found the signet on my right hand and turned it once.
What happens if I refuse?
I find another way.
His voice did not change.
It will not be clean, and it will not be soon.
He stepped closer than a teacher should. He did not touch me. The cold of him reached me through the thin wool of my shirt and rose along my collarbones, and I held my breath because holding my breath was the only thing I could think to do with it. He stopped half a hand from me and watched my face the way a man watches a candle he is not sure he should blow out.
Who was she?
I said. He looked at the portrait. He looked back at me.
Ask me in a place I can't lie.
He went to the desk. He returned with a small vial, sealed in red wax, the contents dark and slow when he tilted it. He set it in my gloved palm and folded my fingers over it gently, as if the gesture might survive being ordinary.
If they find this on you,
He said,
you are no longer a student. You are my accomplice.
I did not give it back. I left. On the way to the door, my eye caught a sketch on his desk, a half-finished drawing of the woman in the portrait, his hand cleaner here than in the manuscript, the pencil softened by years of being touched. I lifted it. I folded it. I put it inside my coat. He saw me do it. He said nothing. In the corridor, I stopped because my legs needed to be told what to do. I pressed the heel of my hand to the place under my collarbone, where his wound sat in his body, and felt nothing there but my own steady pulse, and understood that the wound on his chest was in the same place some hidden part of me had already chosen for the cut. Chapter 6. The name she was never meant to find. I picked the lock at the 3rd pin, the way he had taught me. The sealed archive was older than the upper one, and smelled of stone and mildew and a thinner kind of dust. My lantern washed the shelves yellow in a small ring and left the rest in dark. I found the Thornfield section without searching for it. He had taught me how to read the indexing system. He had taught me how to find this. Marguerite Thornfield's record was thicker than the others. I read standing up. I made it through the first page before I needed to sit. She had been a hunter at 26. She had cornered him in the Academy Chapel at 31. On a winter night, she had opened the silver wound in his chest with a blade I now suspected was the very one beneath my coat. She had stood over him with her boot on his shoulder, the record said, for the time it took the blood to cool in the pew behind him. She lowered the blade. She refused, the record said, to kill him. She refused, the record said, to be turned. She left the chapel before dawn. She married a farmer named Edmund Raymond. She bore 3 children. She died at 71 of a fever in autumn. Edmund Raymond was the name my grandmother had carried into her marriage, my great-great-grandfather, give or take. I had been wearing her chain since I was 9. I sat on the floor. Beneath the record there was a letter in his handwriting, dated 2 years before I was born. It instructed an unnamed reader to monitor every female child born to the Thornfield line, to report on temperament, to report on grief tolerance, to report on whether any of them showed the gift. Beneath the letter there was another letter. It was dated the year I turned 6. It was a single page. It authorized was the word he had used, a contracted attack on a village on the southern frontier. The village was named. My village was named. The date was the date. I matched the date against the morning I had braided dried flowers into my mother's hair. The flowers had been pale at the root and rust at the tip, her hair still damp from the well, her humming never quite resolving while I worked. Back then, the morning had not announced itself as the last time I would touch her. Now the flowers rose first, and my mother came after. I sat with the paper open across my knees until my hand had to be told to close around it. I do not remember leaving the archive. I remember the lantern in my hand and the stone under my boots and the way the corridor seemed to lean. I remember closing the door of my quarters with the careful precision of someone who has just broken something irreplaceable and does not want to admit it. I remember the basin. I burned the stolen pre-enrollment file in the wash basin and watched the ash float until it stopped moving. I kept the village authorization. I kept the letter. I did not burn anything that could be used. I took the silver blade. I cut my right palm, slow, considered, in a single line that ran across the meat below the thumb. The blood pooled. I let it. I watched it until I remembered that it was mine. The cut was in the same place as his wound. Tamsin knocked at sunrise with a cup of tea. Her gaze went to the cut on my palm before it reached my face, then to the chain at my throat, then to the basin behind me. She stayed in the corridor and held out the cup. I took it. The cup stayed full.
You look like you slept in your boots. I didn't sleep.
She nodded slowly. Her own palm, I saw, had a cut on it. Different placement, newer. She caught me looking and tucked her hand into her sleeve. The split scar on her lip moved when she didn't smile.
All right, Raymond. All right. If you need anything, I know where you are.
She went. The tea cooled on my desk. Chapter 7. The confession that was not a confession. The chapel had not been used for service in 50 years. I went at midnight. The stained glass was the only color in the room, deep blue and bruised violet, and one panel of red that fell across the altar in a band like a wound. The pews were dusty. The wood under my boots breathed when I stepped on it. I sat in the front pew with the silver blade laid across my knees and the chain warm against my throat and the manuscript folded inside my coat, and waited. He came without sound. He sat beside me without asking, brought no weapon, and made no move to touch me. He sat with his hands folded in his lap, the way he sat in faculty meetings, in a posture he had chosen and worn for 2 centuries.
This is where she did it,
I said.
This is where she did not do it.
Steady. She was my great-great-grandmother.
Yes.
I waited. He did not look at me. He looked at the band of red glass on the altar.
I loved her.
He said.
Her refusal was the cruelest mercy I have ever received.
And me.
He took a long time to answer.
I no longer know whether I want you to end me or stay. The confusion is itself proof. I should not be allowed to continue.
Do you see me?
His head turned then. He looked at me with the kind of attention I had been living inside since I was 19, and for the first time I understood that the attention had been a hand on a wound he was not allowed to close.
She was warmer.
He said.
Softer. You, when you need to be. You are crueler than I have ever been. I prefer you.
The words were so wrong I could not breathe through them. I do not know who moved first. I would like to say it was him. It would be easier. His hand found mine on the blade, and the cold of him met the cut on my palm, and the cold warmed against the heat of it, as if hunger had a temperature, and the temperature was learning to want. I leaned in. I felt the slow of his breath against my mouth.
Is this part of the design?
I said.
I no longer know.
It was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. I kissed him because I needed to know whether he had trained me even for this. He kissed back like a man who had been waiting for permission for 2 centuries and was not going to misuse it. His glove came off. His other glove came off. The chain at my throat brushed the inside of his wrist when he reached to cradle the back of my neck, and a thin line of skin opened under it, and he did not flinch, and he did not let go. He bled onto my collar. He bled onto my chain. He did not stop. The blade fell. I heard it land somewhere beside the pew. I did not look for it. His mouth was cool everywhere it touched me. The chapel was a held breath around us. He undid my coat with a patience that was almost cruelty, the same patience he used on grip corrections, and I let him, because letting him was its own answer to a question I had been refusing to ask. He pressed his forehead against the cut on my palm. He pressed his mouth against the pulse in my throat. He did not bite. He could have. He didn't. The restraint was a confession I would not have known how to read in him a year ago. I pulled him down into the dust of the floor between the pews, because the pew was not enough room for what was happening. The cold of the floor came through my coat and met the cold of his hand at the back of my neck, and stopped being one thing. The stained glass laid its bruised colors over his shoulder. A button of his shirt sat under my palm and would not move out from under it. My hair came loose. My breath, against my own instruction, kept counting itself.
Tell me to stop.
He said once.
No,
Tell me this is not another test.
this is not a test.
I held his face in both my hands. The cut on my palm marked his cheekbone.
And you do not get to decide what it means.
He closed his eyes. He let me decide what it meant. Afterward, he did not try to hold me. That almost made me angrier than anything else. I sat up in the dust and fastened my shirt with hands that had finally begun to shake, and I looked for him because he was no longer beside me. He was on his knees before the altar, head bowed, shirt undone. The silver wound was open wider than it had been in his chambers, and the red glass laid its color across his chest like an answer he had been waiting for. I picked up the blade. I walked to the altar. I pressed the flat of the silver against his mouth.
No.
I said. His eyes closed. The word went into him deeper than the blade would have. He did not move for a long time. I did not move either. I stood there with my chain warming against the back of his bowed neck, his blood drying on my collar, my own cut still open in my palm, and I understood that I had just refused him something, and that the refusal was the most intimate thing I had ever done. I left him there.
Don't confuse this with forgiveness.
I said at the door.
I would never insult you like that.
Chapter 8. The Vault Beneath the Vault. Tamsin was inside my quarters when I got back. She was sitting on my desk. She had the burned remains of the pre-enrollment file in her hand and was turning the ash over with her thumb the way a person turns a coin. A frayed ribbon I had seen her worry at her wrist for 2 years sat loose on her knee. Her gaze skipped my collar, skipped the cut on my palm, found the mark on my throat, and fled from it. She put the ash down very carefully on the desk.
Venard reports to a board.
She said.
I know. 3 of them have been at the academy longer than any human should be. I
stopped. I know had almost come out again, the small, bright word I had used since I was 19 to keep the larger, uglier ones in. My thumb went to the signet and turned it, and the ring sat where it always sat and refused, for the first time, to mean anything. I tried to count something. The candle, the 7 outlines on his wall, the breaths between me and her. The number did not arrive.
I have known.
I said.
I would not let myself say I knew.
It was not the same sentence. It cost more. Tamsin looked at me then. Her eyes were red at the rims. The split-lip scar moved a little like a question.
My fees.
I said. The words came out of me without permission.
I never paid the second-year fees. Juliet transferred, and no one asked me why she didn't write. I broke into the archive in my second year, and no one ever spoke to me about it. I have been walking through doors that were already open and calling it skill. They were waiting for you to be ready. I was their long-term investment.
I was supposed to be the one who hesitated.
She said it like she was offering me something she didn't want anymore. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress took my weight as if my weight were less than it had been an hour earlier. She held something out, a key, iron, large, plain. I took it without asking what it opened.
There's a vault beneath the vault.
She said.
Under the lower archive. I haven't been in. They don't let me in. They let you in. They've always let you in.
Come with me.
I can't.
Tansen. I can't, Raymond. If I'm in there with you when they come for it, they'll take both of us. They have to think I was nothing. They have to think you did this alone.
She slid off the desk and stopped at the door without looking back.
You look like you slept in your boots.
I didn't sleep.
She went. I waited until the corridor was quiet. I went down. The vault beneath the vault was small and cold and lined with shelves of contracts. I held the lantern up and read until my hand cramped, and then I sat on the floor and read by the lantern between my feet. I read until the names blurred into a single name, and then I went back to the beginning and read them again as separate ones, because each of them was a separate one. Monsters paid to attack villages, specific dates, families paid quietly afterward, or families erased. There was a quiet bookkeeping to which was which. Instructors paid to look elsewhere on particular nights. The signatures repeated, 3 of them, the same 3. And in the margins, threading through every other contract like the embroidery on a coat, his handwriting. Reduce the attack to 1 family. Avoid the well. The child is 6. Spare the chain. Spare the chain. My hand went to my throat before I knew it was going. The silver lay against my skin where it had lain for 15 years. He had written those 3 words on a contract about my village. He had paid for my mother to die and put a note in the margin to keep the metal at my collarbone intact, because he had been planning, even then, to knead a thornfield with her grandmother's chain at her throat. The cruelty was so precise, it stopped being cruelty and became architecture. He was the architect. In some small, useless way, he had also tried to keep the cost down. Both truths sat on the page and neither offered mercy. I sat with the contracts for a long time. I felt his hand on my throat in the chapel. I felt his mouth on my pulse. I felt my own cut against his cheekbone. The body memory came up through the paper and made the reading harder than it should have been. I took the contracts, all of them I could carry. I took copies and made my own copies. I sat at my desk before dawn and wrote a list of names to send them to. 3 rival academies, 2 regional councils, 1 newspaper that had been printing pieces on institutional rot for a year and would understand what they were looking at. I wrote Wilhelm Mulak at the top of the leaked documents. I looked at it for a long time. I crossed it out. I wrote it again. I crossed it out. I wrote it again. And this time I left it. Chapter 9. The choice she was never meant to make. He was waiting for me in the examination chamber. He had lit the candles in a ring. He had set the manuscript open at the 7th method on the small table in the center. His shirt was unbuttoned. The silver wound waited beneath his collarbone, like a door he had spent his whole afterlife holding open. The crimson lining of his coat sat folded over the back of a chair behind him, the only color in the room that was not candlelight. He stood very straight and very still, and when I came in, he looked at me with the expression he had worn in the chapel, the expression of a man who had been waiting for permission for 2 centuries and did not believe he deserved to receive it.
I have prepared everything.
He said.
I know you have.
You will not be punished. The hunter Marcos has been promised your place. The Academy will register my death as an accident in private study.
I know.
You may take your time.
I stepped into the candle ring. I let him see that my hand did not shake. He reached for my wrist, as if to steady it, and found it already still, and for a moment something in his face came as close to pride as I had ever seen on him. His fingertips left a small frost on my glove where they had rested, the cold of him still printing itself on the world without his permission. That was when I knew. I set the silver blade down on the manuscript. The metal made a small, clean sound against the page, just above the margin note. For the one who will not hesitate. I read it once more in his hand and let him see me read it.
I have made my decision.
He did not move.
You wanted my hand.
He did not deny it.
You had it and still did not get to decide what it was for.
I kept my eyes on his. I kept my voice exactly as level as it had been every Tuesday in this room for 3 years.
You made me into a weapon, Professor. But a weapon chooses nothing. I am not a weapon.
The candle nearest his shoulder did not move when he breathed in. I watched it not move.
I am not going to kill you.
His face did not change in any way a stranger could have read. I could read it. I had spent 11 weeks counting his breaths and 3 years counting everything else. And what was on him now was the look of a man who has spent 400 years building toward a door and just heard, on the other side of it, the sound of the lock being changed.
Louise,
Don't.
I would never insult you by asking forgiveness.
You're insulting me now.
He stopped. He bowed his head. The silver wound under his collar caught the candlelight and held it.
The cruelest thing I can offer you
I said,
is more time inside a body you hate. You will watch the institution you served be taken apart by the student you shaped. You will live with what you did. You will live.
He sank very slowly to his knees, with none of the grace of supplication. His legs seemed to have decided the matter for him. I walked out of the candle ring. At the door I looked back once, not at him, at the small table. The blade lay flat on the page. The candle nearest his shoulder was still upright, still motionless. The manuscript was open. I closed the door behind me without sound, the way he had taught me to close every door I ever closed in his presence. I delivered the documents before sunrise. The newspaper opened its door at the 3rd knock. The councilman in the regional office opened his on the 2nd. The rival academy's couriers took the sealed packets without asking what was in them. By the time the first bells of the day rang, the story was past the point of being containable. Chapter 10. The morning after the monster. The gates were sealed by mid-morning. I did not see it. I had already left. A courier found me at the inn at the 2nd crossroad before noon. He was a boy of 14 with a frostbitten nose, and he held out a folded letter and waited for me to give him a coin. I gave him 2. He left without speaking. The letter was short. I read it twice. You will be more than what I made you. You will wonder eventually who is aiming you now. Make the wondering useful. He had not signed it. He never signed anything. I turned the letter over. I wrote on the back, in the pencil I kept in my coat, I'll let you know. I gave it back to the innkeeper to send. I walked at dawn the next morning. The frost was thick on the road, and my breath was visible in the cold air, and my pack was light. The silver blade, wrapped in cloth so it would not catch the sun. The chain at my throat openly. The manuscript. The vial of his blood, still sealed, still slow when I tilted it in my hand to check. The portrait of Marguerite, cut from the frame in his chambers on my way out and rolled inside the manuscript. The dried flower from my desk, pressed between 2 pages. The academy's spires went dark against the pale sky behind me. I did not turn to look at them. I kept count, out of habit, of the number of steps I had taken since the gate. And then, somewhere near the 3rd mile, I stopped counting. The number did not finish itself in my head. It simply ended the way a sentence ends when you decide it's done. The road forked. I stood at the fork for a long time. One path went south, toward the regional councils and the work of dismantling. The other went north, toward cities where a hunter with my training would not be asked too many questions. Since I was 19, both roads had lived on my mental map, on his too. I walked off the road into the trees. The ground was uneven. The light came through the bare branches in cold pieces. My boots made noises my boots had never made on stone. I went until I could not see either path behind me, and then I went a little further, and then I sat down on a fallen log and held my right palm up to the light. The cut had begun to close. It would scar, it was already mine. A stranger passed on a goat track I had not seen, an old woman with a stick and a basket and a face like weather. She raised a hand to me and called me a name that wasn't mine. A southern name, the kind that belonged in the dry beds outside my village, the kind a girl with dried flowers in her hand might have grown into if no one had ever come for her mother. I did not correct her. She went on. Her steps faded. The trees held their quiet. Somewhere behind me, 400 years of a man I had once counted breaths for were going on living, in a body he hated, watching the building he had served be opened to the light. Somewhere ahead of me, in a direction that was not on any map, was a person I had not yet been. I stood up, I shouldered the pack, I walked. My steps did not match a lesson plan.
I hope I kept you company with my story. It would mean so much for you to like and subscribe because it helps me make more. I'll see you in the next one.